Sir, I need to see some identification. For what? I'm reading a book I just bought. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Suspicious activity? I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. What exactly is suspicious? I'm going to need you to step outside with me.
Officer Dennis Palmer had 9 years with the Westfield Police Department and 6 formal complaints in his personnel file when he walked into Cornerstone Books on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2019. The black man sitting in the store's reading nook with a biography and a coffee wasn't just browsing. He was a decorated Iraq War veteran and federal prosecutor. Terrence Mitchell had stopped at Cornerstone Books during his lunch break from the federal courthouse 3 blocks away. He'd purchased a hardcover about the Tuskegee Airmen, $28.95, paid by credit card, grabbed a coffee, and settled into one of the armchairs near the window. No raised voices, no disturbance, no violation of any posted policy. Just a 34-year-old professional enjoying his lunch hour the way thousands of people do every day. But when Officer Palmer glanced through the bookstore window during his patrol and saw a black man sitting alone in the predominantly white shopping district, something triggered in his mind. What happened over the next 38 minutes would cost Palmer his badge, cost the city nearly $8 million, and expose a pattern of racial profiling that had been documented but never seriously addressed. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If you've ever witnessed someone being treated differently for no valid reason, this is gonna hit hard. Hit subscribe because we're breaking down cases where the evidence speaks for itself. Now let's get into how a routine lunch break turned into a federal case. Dennis Palmer's record wasn't extraordinary by department standards, but it showed a clear pattern. 6 complaints over 9 years, 5 involved interactions with black residents in affluent areas of Westfield, 3 specifically mentioned unnecessary questioning, and aggressive demeanor during non-criminal encounters. 2 complaints resulted in written reprimands. 1 led to a 3-day suspension without pay after Palmer detained a black realtor showing a home to clients. The realtor filed a formal grievance. The department settled quietly for an undisclosed amount. Palmer's 2017 performance review noted, "Officer demonstrates adequate technical skills, but needs improvement in community relations and de-escalation techniques." The recommendation was additional training. Palmer completed an 8-hour workshop on implicit bias, then returned to the same patrol patterns, the same neighborhoods, the same behaviors. His supervisors had documentation, they had complaints. What they didn't have was a person capable and willing to follow through. It was 1:47 p.m. on March 12, 2019. Terrence Mitchell had a trial prep meeting at 2:30 p.m., giving him about 40 minutes to decompress with a book. Cornerstone Books was a local institution, family-owned for 30 years, known for author events and a solid selection of African-American history and literature. Terrence had been there before. The staff knew him by sight, though not by name. He browsed for about 8 minutes, selected the Tuskegee Airmen biography, paid at the register, and asked for a coffee. The cashier, a woman named Sandra Chen, who'd worked there for 5 years, later recalled, "He was perfectly polite, asked how my day was going, normal customer interaction." At 1:55 p.m., Terrence sat down in one of the reading chairs positioned near the front window. The store had 4 security cameras. 2 covered the entrance and checkout area. 1 monitored the back hallway. 1 provided a wide angle of the main floor, including the reading nook. Every moment of what happened next was recorded. At 2:11 p.m., Officer Palmer walked past the bookstore window. He was on foot patrol, standard procedure in the downtown shopping district. According to his later statement, he observed a black male sitting alone in the bookstore and decided to conduct a welfare check. There was no call for service, no reported incident, no indication that any welfare check was needed. Palmer entered the store. Sandra looked up from the register, assuming he wanted to browse or ask directions. Palmer didn't acknowledge her. He walked directly toward Terrence. Terrence was reading, coffee on the small table beside him, completely absorbed in the book. Palmer stopped 3 feet away. "Sir, I need to see some identification." Terrence looked up, genuinely confused. "For what?" "I'm reading a book I just bought." Palmer's hand moved to rest on his duty belt. Not aggressively, but in that unmistakable cop stance. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Terrence closed his book, keeping his finger on the page. Suspicious activity? I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. What exactly is suspicious about reading? This was the moment where most encounters could de-escalate. A reasonable explanation, an apology, an exit. Palmer didn't take it. Nah, I need to verify your reason for being here. Terrence felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had walking through certain neighborhoods in uniform, the same feeling that made him hyper-aware of every movement when pulled over for a minor traffic violation. My reason for being here is that I'm a customer. I bought a book, I'm reading it. That's my reason. I'm going to need you to step outside with me. Sandra Chen had been watching the exchange from the register. Something felt wrong. She'd worked retail for 12 years. She'd seen shoplifters, seen disturbances, seen actual problems. This wasn't a problem. This was a customer being hassled. She walked over. Officer, is there an issue? Because that gentleman is a customer. He purchased a book about 15 minutes ago. Palmer didn't look at her. Ma'am, I need you to return to your station. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. This is my workplace, and you're questioning a paying customer who hasn't done anything wrong. Palmer's jaw tightened. I'm conducting an investigation. Please step back. Sandra pulled out her phone and called her manager, speaking quietly but clearly. Tom, there's a police officer in the store questioning the guy who bought the Tuskegee book. No reason. You should get down here. Across the store, an older woman named Grace Hoffman had been browsing the travel section. She'd noticed Palmer enter, noticed his immediate focus on Terrence, noticed the body language. She started recording on her phone. Not openly. She angled it while pretending to look at books, but the audio was clear. Terrence remained seated, but his legal training kicked in. And document everything. Stay calm. Build a record. Officer, I'm going to ask you directly, what crime do you suspect me of committing? I don't need to suspect you of a crime to request identification. This was technically true in some contexts, but not this one. Palmer had no reasonable suspicion, no articulable facts, no legal basis for the detention. Terrence knew this. Palmer should have known this. Under Terry v. Ohio, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to detain me. I'm sitting in a bookstore reading a book I purchased. What's your reasonable suspicion? The mention of legal precedent seemed to catch Palmer off guard. Are you a lawyer? I'm a customer, and I'm asking what legal basis you have for this interaction. Palmer's face flushed. I don't have to justify myself to you. I either provide identification or come outside. I'm not doing either. If you believe I've committed a crime, arrest me. If not, leave me alone. Tom Brennan, the store manager, arrived within 3 minutes of Sandra's call. He was a former teacher, soft-spoken, conflict-averse, but protective of his staff and customers. Officer, I'm the manager. What's the problem here? Palmer turned, clearly frustrated at the growing number of people questioning his authority. I'm investigating suspicious activity. What suspicious activity? This man bought a book. He's reading it. That's what people do in bookstores. I received reports. From who? Because I've been here all day and nobody's reported anything to me. Tom looked at Sandra, who shook her head. Officer, I need to be clear. This customer is welcome here. He's done nothing wrong. I'm asking you to leave him alone. This should have ended it. The property owner, through his manager, had made it clear there was no trespass, no violation, no complaint. Palmer had no legal grounds to continue. If you're thinking this should have been over already, you're right. But here's where it gets worse. Hit that subscribe button because we track these cases from start to finish, including what happens when officers refuse to back down. Let's see how backup changed the dynamic. Officer Lisa Moreno arrived 4 minutes later. She'd worked with Palmer before, knew his reputation, knew he could be stubborn. She walked in expecting a clear situation that justified backup. What she found instead was a man sitting calmly with a book, a manager insisting everything was fine, and Palmer demanding the man produce ID, despite having no legal basis. Moreno pulled Palmer aside. "Dennis, what's going on? Guy's being uncooperative, refusing to ID. What's he doing? He was just sitting there." Moreno's expression shifted. "Sitting there? That's it?" It looked wrong. "Dennis, the manager says he's a customer. What's the actual violation?" Palmer didn't have an answer. Moreno walked over to Terrence. "Sir, I apologize for the disruption. Are you all right?" Terrence looked at her evenly. "I'd be better if I could finish my book without being treated like a criminal." Moreno nodded. "Understood. You're free to stay. Again, I apologize." She turned to Palmer. "We're leaving. Now." Palmer should have walked out. His backup had assessed the situation and determined there was no issue. The manager had made it clear the customer was welcome, but Palmer's pride wouldn't let him. "He needs to provide ID first." Moreno's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Dennis, stop. You don't have reasonable suspicion. The manager wants him here. If you push this, you're opening yourself to a lawsuit." Palmer's hand moved to his handcuffs. Terrence stood slowly, hands visible. "If you're arresting me, do it. But understand that I'm a federal prosecutor. There are multiple witnesses, and this store has cameras. Whatever you do next is being documented." Palmer froze. Federal prosecutor. Cameras. Witnesses. The reality seemed to hit him all at once. Moreno grabbed his arm and physically guided him toward the door. "We're done here." After the officers left, Tom Brennan approached Terrence. "I am so sorry that happened. That was completely unacceptable." Terrence was shaking, not from fear, but from suppressed anger. "I need copies of your security footage. You'll have them today. Anything else you need, just ask." Grace Hoffman, the woman who'd been recording, came over. "I got most of that on audio. I'm happy to provide it if needed." Sandra wrote down her contact information as a witness. By 3:30 p.m., Terrence had the security footage on a thumb drive. By 4 p.m., he'd filed a formal complaint with the Westfield Police Department. By 5 p.m., he'd contacted a civil rights attorney he knew from law school. By 6 p.m., local news had picked up the story. The Westfield Police Department's Internal Affairs Division opened an investigation the next morning, but they weren't the only ones. The county prosecutor's office, Terrence's employer, sent a formal letter demanding a full review. The state attorney general's office opened a preliminary inquiry into whether this was part of a pattern. And Terrence filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, alleging racial discrimination and violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. The investigation uncovered what advocates had been documenting for years. Palmer's 6 complaints weren't isolated incidents. Data analysis showed that over his 9-year career, Palmer had initiated contact with black residents at nearly 3 times the rate of white residents, despite working the same mixed-race patrol district. Of his 147 suspicious person stops over 5 years, 89 involved black individuals. The downtown shopping district where he worked was 68% white. 3 previous complaints involved black professionals in the area, a doctor leaving his office, a business consultant waiting for a client outside a restaurant, and the realtor incident mentioned earlier. None of those encounters had resulted in arrests or citations, because there was never any actual criminal activity. The department had settlement agreements, training records, supervisor notes expressing concern, but Palmer had remained on patrol in the same area, exhibiting the same patterns. Terrence's lawsuit sought $8.5 million, $2 million in compensatory damages, $6.5 million in punitive damages. The city initially denied all wrongdoing. Then the depositions began. Palmer, under oath, struggled to articulate what had been suspicious about Terrence's behavior. He looked like he didn't belong there. Why didn't he belong in a bookstore? I mean, it's a nice area. Expensive shops. Are black people not allowed in nice areas? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Palmer had no good answer. The department's lead investigator testified that Palmer's stop had no legal justification and violated department policy. Officer Moreno testified that when she arrived, it was immediately clear there was no legitimate reason for the encounter. Tom Brennan testified that the incident had traumatized his staff and damaged the store's reputation in the black community. 3 weeks before trial, the city made its first settlement offer, $350,000. Terrence's attorney rejected it immediately. This isn't about money, this is about accountability. The offer went to $750,000. Rejected. $1.2 million. Rejected. The city was facing a trial they couldn't win, with evidence that would humiliate them publicly. Final offer, $7.7 million, plus reforms. Terrence accepted, but only with specific conditions. The final agreement included $7.7 million to Terrence Mitchell, termination of Officer Dennis Palmer, mandatory bias training for all officers, conducted by independent civil rights organizations, creation of an early warning system to flag officers with complaint patterns, quarterly public reporting of stop data by race and neighborhood, independent audit of the department's practices over the previous 5 years, revision of suspicious person stop policies to require articulable facts. Dennis Palmer was fired on October 8, 2019, 7 months after the incident. The termination letter cited violation of department policy, our constitutional rights violations, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Palmer filed a grievance through his union. The arbitrator upheld the termination, writing, "The officer's conduct was indefensible, and his explanations revealed troubling racial bias that cannot be remediated through training." Palmer applied to 3 other police departments in neighboring jurisdictions. All rejected him once they reviewed his file. He eventually left law enforcement entirely, taking a job in private security that didn't involve public contact. If you want to see more stories where accountability actually happens, hit that subscribe button. Drop justice in the comments if you think these settlements should always come with mandatory reforms. Now let's talk about what happened after the headlines faded. The $7.7 million settlement was the largest in Westfield's history. The city's insurance rates increased by 34% the following year. The police chief announced early retirement, replaced by a reformer brought in from outside the department. The department implemented the required reforms, though not without resistance. Community surveys showed that trust in the police among black residents remained below 40%, even 2 years after the incident. Recruiting became more difficult. The department struggled to attract diverse candidates. Terrence used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal fund, providing representation for people experiencing racial profiling. He still works as a federal prosecutor. He still goes to Cornerstone Books, now has a standing invitation to their monthly author events. He speaks occasionally about his experience, usually to law enforcement audiences. "I had every advantage," he tells them. "I'm a lawyer. I knew my rights. I had witnesses and cameras. Most people don't have those things. Most people just endure the humiliation and move on. That's why training matters. That's why accountability matters. Because the next person might not be as fortunate as I was." Cornerstone Books installed a small sign near the reading area. "All are welcome, always." Tom Brennan implemented training for staff on supporting customers facing discrimination. The Westfield Police Department shows modest improvement in its stop data. Disparities have decreased but not disappeared. Officer Lisa Marino was promoted to sergeant and now leads bias training for new recruits. Dennis Palmer has not spoken publicly about the incident, and Terrence Mitchell occasionally stops by the bookstore during lunch, orders a coffee, and reads in the same chair where it all happened. If this story reminded you why documentation and witnesses matter, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to see that accountability is possible. Type reform in the comments if you believe these changes should be standard everywhere. Your engagement helps these stories reach the people who can make a difference. $7.7 million settlement, 6 prior complaints, 9 years of documented patterns, 38 minutes that changed multiple lives. 1 career ended, 1 department forced to change, 1 prosecutor who turned a violation into systemic reform. And the case proves something essential. When people refuse to accept injustice as normal, when evidence is preserved, when communities demand accountability, change becomes possible. This case showed what happens when racial profiling gets caught on camera and can't be denied. But what happens when the victim isn't a federal prosecutor? When they're just an ordinary person with no legal training and no powerful position? That story is even more revealing about how the system really works, and we're covering it next.